I dread Friday nights now. That's when my new house comes alive, twisting its halls and thumping deep within its walls. On those nights, reality itself seems to distort inside these rooms. The long corridor leading to my bedroom is unremarkable by day, but on Friday nights, it becomes a tunnel of dread. In the shadows, familiar doorways seem to shift positions or recede. More than once, I've found myself standing in a dark hallway that feels subtly unfamiliar, heart pounding as I question if the house's layout has changed or if my mind is playing tricks on me. At the end of that hallway is the door to the basement, a heavy oak slab that I always keep closed. Lately, I've sensed that door almost watching me, waiting for Friday. It started on the very first Friday after I moved in. Sometime around midnight, I was in bed trying to drift off when scratch, scratch. A faint sound pattered inside the wall above my head. I opened my eyes to total darkness and held my breath. The noise was so soft, I wondered if I'd imagined it. Perhaps old pipes cooling? Or mice scurrying between the studs? I tapped the wall, feeling a ridiculous urge to say hello to whatever might be there. The scratching went silent. I didn't sleep much that night, ears tuned to every creak. By morning's light, I had dismissed the incident. The house was old, noises were normal. I even joked to myself about Friday night mice. But as the week wore on, I found myself growing uneasy each day approaching Friday. Sure enough, when Friday night arrived again, the house upped the ante. Around 11 p.m., as I double-checked my windows and doors, a new ritual before bed, I heard a soft creak out in the hallway. I peered down the long corridor. The dim nightlight cast just enough glow to see that the basement door was ajar, a black slit gaping in the darkness. I distinctly remembered closing it firmly that afternoon. Heart thudding, I approached the basement door. The air beyond it felt cooler, carrying a faint musty odor from below. With a trembling hand, I nudged the door shut until I heard the latch click. I didn't dare descend those steps to investigate. I simply stood there, barefoot on cold floorboards, listening. Nothing. Only silence and my own panicked breathing. I whispered a shaky "hello" down the stairwell, instantly regretting it. No answer, just the quiet house. After a long minute, I turned the key in the basement door's old lock. Why hadn't I thought to lock it before? And hurried back to my bedroom, telling myself I had to be some draft or forgetfulness. Still, it took forever to get to sleep. And when I did, I dreamed of softly opening doors. Over the next few days, I tried to act as though everything was normal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my house was biding its time. I found excuses to stay out late on weekdays, as if avoiding the house would keep me safe. But Friday loomed, inevitable. By Thursday night, anxiety gripped me so hard I could barely eat. I left every light on as dusk fell, determined to face whatever came with eyes wide open. If the house wanted to play games, I would be ready. That third Friday, the atmosphere felt different from the start. The air was weighty, oppressive, with a silence that pressed on my eardrums. I sat in the living room, TV muted, straining to hear anything. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. Just after midnight, a heavy thud reverberated through the ceiling, so hard it rattled a picture frame on the wall. I leapt up, adrenaline surging. The sound had come from directly above me. My master bedroom? With trembling steps, I ascended the stairs, using my phone's flashlight to push back the thick darkness. At the top, I paused. The layout of the upstairs hall. Something was off. The corridor stretched further than it should, as if an extra 10 feet had materialized beyond my bedroom door. My pulse drumming in my ears, I took a one step forward into the dim hall. The floorboards groaned under me. Another step, groan. It felt like I was walking into a space that hadn't existed minutes before. I reached the door to my bedroom and grasped the knob. For a moment, I hesitated, afraid of what I'd find on the other side. I half expected the room beyond to be different, changed, or rearranged. But when I forced myself to look, everything appeared in its place. realized I was holding. Perhaps the upstairs hall had always been this long. Maybe my frayed nerves were distorting my perception. Bang! 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 I nearly screamed. The violent knocking was unmistakable, and it was coming from the basement door downstairs. I spun on my heel, heart in my throat. The house had been utterly still a second ago. Now it exploded with echoing bangs, as if something on the other side of that basement door was pounding to be let out. Each blow rattled the floor beneath my feet. I bounded down the stairs, gripping the banister to keep from falling in my panic. In the foyer, the basement door trembled under an onslaught of heavy blows. The wood vibrated. I could see the brass knob vibrating with each hit. In a surge of foolish bravery, I rushed forward and threw my weight against the door, holding it shut. The force on the other side was incredible. Every thud against the wood sent a jolt through my shoulder. "It wants to come up," my mind shrieked. I don't know how I knew, but I could feel a furious intention behind those hits, something insisting on getting through. "Stop!" I shouted, voice cracking. The banging paused, as if whatever was beyond had heard me. In that horrible silence, I pressed my ear to the door, almost gagging with my fear. The door felt strangely warm against my cheek. For a few seconds, I heard only my own pulse. Then, from deep below on the basement steps, came a new sound, the slow creak of a footstep on an old wooden stair. Creak. Then another creak, closer this time. My blood turned to ice. It was coming up the stairs. I thumbled for the key in the lock. If it wasn't already locked, I wanted it locked now. My shaking fingers barely managed to turn it. Another step creaked on the staircase just beyond the door, followed by a wet, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled up one step at a time. I backed away, realizing that if the thing reached the top, it might try the handle. I had to hold it. I grabbed a nearby chair and wedged it under the basement door's knob. Hardly a moment later, the knob jiggled frantically, then rattled as a furious pounding resumed. The door jolted in its frame as if hit by a battering ram. A thin rain of dust shook loose from the door jamb each blow. Any second now, that old wood would splinter. Terror fueled me. I stumbled back, ready to flee out the front door and never look back. But in my panic, I crashed into the entry table, knocking over a lamp with a shatter. I glanced toward the front of the house. My heart sunk. The front door. It wasn't there. Only a solid wall greeted me where the door should have been. In my confusion, I blinked rapidly and wiped at my eyes. The front door had to be there. I had entered through it mere hours ago. I reached out blindly, fingers scrabbling at painted plaster that should have been a doorframe. Behind me, the basement door gave a hideous crack, wood splintering. A strange draft of air wafted out, carrying a stench of earth and rot. I gagged, pressing my hand over my mouth. This can't be real. My house can't just change and trap me. Yet the evidence loomed around me in mocking silence. My only exit had vanished, and I could feel the walls themselves subtly closing in. The corridor had just run down, now seeming shorter, narrower. The house was corralling me, funneling me toward whatever waiting behind that basement door. The pounding stopped. An awful quiet fell, broken only by my ragged breathing. Maybe it's given up? A faint, desperate hope sparked in me. Maybe whatever it was had slunk back down into the dark. Maybe I was safe if I just stayed upstairs until daylight. I took a one hesitant step away from the foyer. Creak. It was not the sound of a footstep this time, but the slow swinging hinges of the basement door opening. A high-pitched whine of metal, prolonged and eerie, echoed through the house. I stared, rooted to the spot, as the chair that had been bracing the door toppled over with a thud. It's unlocked, but how? My mind reeled. I had turned the key, hadn't I? Or had the house simply decided locks didn't apply anymore? A darkness deeper than night pooled beyond the half-open basement doorway. I squinted, trying to make out any shape within that blackness. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The house was deathly still. Then I discerned it, a shape standing on the threshold of the basement, tall and contorted. It was just a silhouette, but the way it occupied the space was wrong, as if the darkness itself had bled into a human-like form.
My chest seized in primal horror when I realized the silhouette was looking at me. Though I saw no eyes, I felt its gaze, hungry and hateful. I wanted to scream, to charge forward and slam the door again, to do anything but remain frozen, but terror held me. In the dim light, I saw the silhouette tilt its head, as if studying me in return. The house seemed to tighten around us, the walls narrowing, the ceiling looming lower. My vision tunneled. The last thing I remember is that silhouette surging forward with impossible speed, the basement door crashing fully open. Finally, a scream tore itself from my throat, then everything went black. I'm not sure how long I was out. I woke up sprawled on the foyer floor in gray morning light, every joint aching.
I never paid much attention to my neighbor until the Friday night I saw a strange glow pulsing from his basement window. In our quiet suburb, where nothing ever happens, that eerie light instantly caught my eye. It was just past 11 p.m. and I was taking out the trash when I noticed it, a faint flicker of unnatural blue-green radiance seeping from a tiny basement window on the side of Mr. Wheeler's house. Every other window was dark. The hairs on my arms rose as I stood there in my driveway, the garbage bag dangling from my hand, watching that weird light dance in the darkness. Something was wrong in that house. Mr. Wheeler moved in about a year ago, a quiet man in his 50s who mostly kept to himself. We'd exchange polite nods if we happened to check our mail at the same time, but he was far from chatty. I realized I had never seen him outside at night, not once. In fact, on most evenings, his house would go completely dark by 9 p.m. Early to bed, early to rise, I figured. But that pattern changed abruptly a few months ago. I began noticing that on Friday nights, lights would stay on later at the Wheeler house. Through my upstairs bathroom window, I could see a faint glow from his downstairs rooms even past midnight. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he enjoyed a late-night TV marathon to kick off the weekend. Then came the first odd incident. One Saturday morning, as I watered my front lawn, I saw Mr. Wheeler dragging something large out of his house and into the trunk of his car. It looked like a heavy garbage bag, the kind contractors use, thick, black, and bulging with something. I remember the way it landed in his trunk with a dull thump. I jokingly called out, "Spring cleaning?" across the fence. He jolted at the sound of my voice, eyes wide and lips parted as if I'd caught him in a shameful act. For an awkward moment, he just stared at me from his driveway, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool morning air. Then he forced a chuckle and mumbled something about just disposing of some old junk. I didn't press him. We all have our secrets. But as he drove off, I noticed he went in the direction of the old landfill on the edge of town, not the city dump. Odd. I shook it off, telling myself I was overthinking a perfectly mundane chore. Over the next few weeks, though, more red flags popped up. Every Friday around dusk, Mr. Wheeler would emerge into his yard and meticulously check all his doors and ground floor windows. I'd see him testing each lock twice, pushing on the frames to ensure their sturdiness. Once, I even saw him hammering nails into his own back door, as if bolting it shut. It was an extreme security routine, especially for a safe neighborhood like ours. By sundown, he'd disappear indoors and not reappear until Saturday morning. No one else ever entered that house. He seemed to have no family, no visitors. I found it strange enough that I mentioned it to a friend at work who joked that maybe Wheeler was a werewolf chaining himself up to avoid hurting people. We had a good laugh, and I felt a bit silly for my paranoia. But that brings me back to the night of the glow. That Friday, as usual, I saw Mr. Wheeler perform his lockup ritual. By 7 p.m., his curtains were drawn tight, and not a sliver of light escaped, until around 11 when that basement window came alive with an otherworldly luminescence. Standing in my driveway, I realized I'd never seen any lights on in his basement before. In fact, I wasn't even sure he used the basement at all. Most houses on our street have a small cellar space down there, mainly for water heaters and storage. Mine is unfinished and empty. Many folks forget they even have a basement. Mr. Wheeler, it seemed, had not forgotten. I tossed my trash bag in the bin and almost without thinking drifted closer to the low hedge that separated our properties. The The closer I got, the more clear it became that the light from his basement wasn't a static glow like a lamp or TV. It flickered, growing intense, then dimmer, then intense again as if fueled by some rhythmic energy. Accompanying it was a faint sound on the breeze, a muffled whir or perhaps a chant. I couldn't quite tell. I found myself creeping to the very edge of my yard, drawn by morbid curiosity. I knew it was nosy and wrong, but I just had to see. Keeping low, I slipped between the hedge and crept across Mr. Wheeler's lawn. The grass was slightly overgrown, my shoes damped with dew as I approached the side of the house. I positioned myself below the small rectangular basement window, which was set at ground level. Taking a quiet breath, I slowly raised my head to peek inside. At first, I could only see shifting shadows thrown against the wall. A strange light came from somewhere on the floor out of my view, pulsating softly. The muffled sound was clearer now. My heart skipped as I realized it was a voice. Mr. Wheeler's voice, low and fervent, as if reciting something under his breath. I caught snatches of words, though none in a language I recognized. His tone was urgent, almost pleading. Kneeling in the dirt, I carefully pressed my face closer to the glass, angling for a better look. I had to blink. The flickering light was now tinged with a sickly red hue that hadn't been apparent from afar. It cast a ghastly, moving silhouette of Mr. Wheeler on the wall. He appeared to be rocking back and forth. Suddenly, the light flared blindingly bright. I squinted, and in that moment, my eyes managed to focus past the reflections. What I saw chilled my blood. Mr. Wheeler was crouched on the basement floor amid a circle of tall, flickering candles. Strange symbols were painted on the concrete walls in what looked like chalk or charcoal, circling him. And directly across from the mirror, propped against the far wall, stood a full-length mirror. The surface of the mirror rippled with that same pulsing red light, obscuring its reflection like a foggy window pane. Mr. Wheeler was chanting at it. My stomach did a sick flip. Was my neighbor performing some kind of ritual? It looked like something out of a nightmare. As I watched, rooted to the spot, he reached out towards the mirror. His hand hovered just above the glass, which shimmered and bent as if the surface was liquid. I bit down on my lip to keep from gasping out loud. This was impossible. No mirror should do that. The red glow brightened, and for a split second I thought I might see another hand from inside the mirror press back against Mr. Wheeler's palm, fingers splayed. I must have made a noise, perhaps a strangled cry of shock, because Mr. Wheeler's head snapped towards the window. I ducked instantly, heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. Blood roared in my ears. Had he seen me? The chanting stopped. All I could hear was my own pulse and the distant chirp of crickets. The red light dimmed slightly, casting dancing shadows through the window above me. I held my breath and dared not move a muscle. Minutes may have passed. Finally, I heard a shuffling from inside, then the unmistakable sound of the basement window being latched shut from within. He must have noticed it was unlocked. I realized in my eagerness I hadn't even considered that detail. Panic flooded me. I needed to get back to my yard before he decided to come outside. Keeping low, I crawled away from the window and slipped back through the hedges, not caring that branches scratched my arms and face. In my haste, I tripped over a sprinkler head and nearly sprawled onto my lawn. Regaining my footing, I bolted for my front door as quietly as possible, dashed inside and killed the lights. Safe in my dark living room, I peeked through a slit in my curtains towards Mr. Wheeler's house. To my relief, I didn't see him in the yard. However, through his closed curtains on the ground floor, I observed erratic shadows and flashes of that red glow for another hour or so. Just before 1 a.m., the lights in his house all went completely out. Whatever ritual or experiment he'd been conducting was evidently over. I spent a restless night replaying what I'd seen over and over. A mirror, a hand from the inside. It felt like I had stumbled into a horror movie. I knew I should mind my own business, but how could I? Something unnatural was happening right next door. By sunrise, I decided I had to speak with Mr. Wheeler, if only to assure myself that he was sane and I hadn't imagined everything. Late Saturday morning, I spotted him in his front yard, watering a flower bed as if it were any ordinary weekend.
Summoning my courage, I walked over and casually mentioned I'd been up late and thought I saw lights in your basement last night. Everything okay? For a split second, his polite mask slipped. His eyes widened and his grip tightened on the garden hose. I saw his knuckles go white. Then he gave a thin, strained smile and mumbled something about just disposing of some old junk. I didn't press him. We all have our secrets. But as he drove off, I noticed he went in the direction of the old landfill on the edge of town, not the city dump. Odd. I shook it off, telling myself I was overthinking a perfectly mundane chore. Over the next few weeks, though, more red flags popped up. Every Friday around dusk, Mr. Wheeler would emerge into his yard and meticulously check all his doors and ground floor windows. I'd see him testing each lock twice, pushing on the frames to ensure their sturdiness. Once I even saw him hammering nails into his own back door, as if bolting it shut. It was an extreme security routine, especially for a safe neighborhood like ours. By sundown, he'd disappear indoors and not reappear until Saturday morning. No one else ever entered that house. He seemed to have no family, no visitors. I found it strange enough that I mentioned it to a friend at work who joked that maybe Wheeler was a werewolf chaining himself up to avoid hurting people. We had a good laugh, and I felt a bit silly for my paranoia. But that brings me back to the night of the glow. That Friday, as usual, I saw Mr. Wheeler perform his lockup ritual. By 7 p.m., his curtains were drawn tight and not a sliver of light escaped, until around 11 when that basement window came alive with an otherworldly luminescence. Standing in my...
First time I lost a chunk of time in this house, I thought I was just tired. It was a Friday night and I was unpacking boxes in my new living room. One moment, the clock on the mantel read 11:32 p.m. as I sorted some old books onto a shelf. I remember yawning, deciding I'd better get to bed soon. I blinked, maybe I did nod off for a second, and suddenly the mantel clock showed 3:47 a.m. I jolted up, books started running. Somehow, over 4 hours had passed in what felt like an instant. I had no memory of falling asleep or anything else during that time. I laughed it off as exhaustion and stumbled to bed, puzzled but not yet alarmed. Over the next week, little things around the house started to play tricks on me. I'd set my keys down on the kitchen counter, only to find them later on the coffee table in the den. A coffee mug vanished from the sink, then reappeared 2 days later in the refrigerator. I'm the only person living here, so there's no one else who can be moving. Moving was stressful, and I was creating a big scatterbrain with all the new house jitters. By the time Friday rolled around again, I'd almost forgotten about those odd occurrences. That evening, I invited a friend, Mark, over to see the place and watch a movie. We ordered pizza, cracked open a couple of beers, and for a few hours I felt like myself again. The house felt cozy and normal with someone else there. Around 10 p.m., Mark told me I shouldn't fall asleep late the next time. I began tidying up the living room, picking up stray napkins and bottle caps. I remember tossing the trash into the bin under the kitchen sink. Then, nothing. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, upstairs, blinking in confusion at the morning sunlight streaming through a window. It was Saturday, 7 a.m. I had lost another chunk of time, this time nearly the entire night. I felt a cold sweat break out as I walked through the house. The TV in the den was off. I had left it on when Mara left. The kitchen was spotless, far cleaner than I recalled leaving it. Every empty bottle and crumb of pizza was gone. The trash bin was empty and a fresh liner was in it. It's as if someone had cleaned up after me while I sleepwalked. Did I do all this myself, I wondered? Had I been on autopilot, doing chores while essentially unconscious? It seemed absurd, yet the evidence was around me. I even found that I had neatly washed and put away the dishes. This wasn't just misplacing keys. This was hours of complex activity I had zero recollection of. I stood at the sink, gripping the counter, trying to slow my breathing. "Something's wrong with me," I whispered. Was I losing my mind? Developing some kind of fugue state or strange insomnia-driven mania? My reflection in the darkened window looked as disturbed as I felt. Pale, eyes wide, hair tousled from what apparently had not been a restful sleep. As I stared at myself, utterly perplexed, I noticed movement behind me in the reflection. A tall, dark figure seemed to be standing in the kitchen doorway, right behind my shoulder.
I whirled around, heart in my throat. There was no one there, only an empty doorway leading to a quiet hall. I was certain I saw something. A trick of the light? An after-image from my imagination? I cautiously checked every room, every closet, even the backyard, though all doors were locked. Nothing. I was alone. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By Monday, I had convinced myself to see a doctor. Perhaps stress and moving had triggered some neurological issue or sleep disorder. My appointment was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I set up a few cheap cameras around the house, my little nanny cams to catch myself sleepwalking or whatever I was doing. Part of me was embarrassed, but I needed to know. I especially aimed one at the hallway outside my bedroom and another covering the living room and base of the stairs. If I was roaming around at night, I'd at least have proof to show the doctor. All week, nothing happened. No lost time, no moved objects. The house felt normal and still. I started to hope that maybe whatever weird adjustment phase I had gone through was over. Then Friday night came again. I spent the day deliberately relaxing, took a calming walk, had a light dinner, no alcohol or caffeine. I even sat down to meditate in the evening, trying to center myself. I was determined to have a boring, normal night. Around 11 p.m., feeling pleasantly drowsy, I headed upstairs to my bedroom. Flicking off lights as I went, I noticed an odd chill in the house. It was early autumn, not cold enough for heating yet, but the air felt cold. I pulled my sweater tighter and made a mental note to check the HVAC in case something was off. In my bedroom, I set the camera on my dresser to record, just in case, and got under the covers with a book. The quiet of the house pressed in on me. After a while, I realized I wasn't really absorbing the words on the page. My eyes were heavy. I decided to call it a night. I reached over to turn off the bedside lamp when crash! A clatter echoed from downstairs, the unmistakable sound of something shattering. I jolted upright, heart hammering. The house fell silent again. I grabbed my phone and the small flashlight I'd left by the bed and cautiously crept out into the hallway. "Hello?" I called out softly, throat tight. No response. Of course there wouldn't be, no one else was here. Unless someone broke in. The thought sent a flare of fear through me. I carefully descended the stairs, flashlight beam cutting ahead of me through the dark. Reaching the ground floor, I immediately saw what had happened. The large mirror in the foyer had fallen off the wall and lay in pieces on the hardwood. Glittering shards fanned out all around the frame. I groaned aloud, more upset by the mess and sudden scare than the loss of the mirror. It was a cheap one I'd hung myself. As I approached to assess the damage, I was struck by how far the shards had spread. The mirror hadn't simply dropped. It looked almost as if it had been flung with force. Tiny slivers of glass glinted all the way across the foyer into the living room rug. How could a simple fall do that? I nudged the frame with my toe and winced as more glass tinkled loose. Great, I'll have to be extremely careful cleaning this. I decided to fetch the broom and dustpan from the kitchen. I flipped on the kitchen light and froze. Every cabinet door was open, gaping like dozens of yawning mouths. On the counter, all my utensils from the drawer were laid out in a perfect line. Spoons, forks, knives, all in parallel. Every single picture frame from my living room walls was now carefully placed on the kitchen floor, each picture facing up as if on display. It was as if someone had meticulously and silently rearranged my entire downstairs while I was upstairs. The broom slipped from my hand, clattering on the tile. I stood there in the doorway, a cold dread creeping up my spine. I didn't drink. I wasn't on medication. There was no explanation for this. And yet here it was, undeniable. A sudden soft thump sounded from above, directly overhead, the master bedroom. I realized with a lurch that I had left my phone upstairs on the bed. If someone was in the house, I needed that phone to call for help. Swallowing hard, I grabbed the heaviest thing within reach, an iron skillet from the stove, and slowly made my way back up the stairs, gripping the skillet in sweaty hands. The upstairs was dark. I had left it that way. At the top, I listened intently. A thump had been gentle, could have just been the house settling. But after what I'd just seen in the kitchen, I wasn't buying any house-settling explanations. My bedroom door was partially open, just as I had left it. I nudged it with the skillet. The beam from my little flashlight swept the room. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. I stepped in, eyes darting. My phone was still on the rumpled bedspread. I snatched it up and backed towards the door, adrenaline urging me to run outside and call someone, the police, a friend, anyone. That's when I heard a soft click behind me in the hallway. The door to the guest room, directly across from mine, had just closed on its own. I was sure it had been open a moment ago. My flashlight beam trembled as I directed it at the guest room door. It was now shut tight. My throat felt dry. I mustered the loudest voice I could. "Hello? I'm armed." I brandished the skillet, feeling utterly ridiculous and terrified all at once. No answer. The silence in the house was absolute. Even the usual hum of the fridge downstairs was absent. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Creeping forward, I pressed my ear against the guest room door. Nothing. Just as I was about to build the courage to turn the knob, a whisper came from the other side. Yes, a whisper. So faint, I wondered if it was in my head. I couldn't make out words, just a breathy syllables. That was enough for me. Abandoning all pretense of bravery, I turned on my heel and bolted down the hall. As I did, crash! The guest room door slammed open behind me. I dared not look back. I flew down the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping on the last step. The foyer that I had left strewn with broken glass was pristine. The mirror was back on the wall, intact, as if it had never fallen. I didn't stop to question it. I yanked open the front door and stumbled out into the night, my chest heaving. I called my friend Mara first. Between panicked gasps, I managed to beg her to come pick me up. I must have sounded insane. To her credit, she showed up 10 minutes later, pajamas on, worry etched on her face. I was standing in the driveway, staring at my house. It looked so normal from the outside. Dark, quiet, the porch light gently illuminating the front stoop where, just beyond that door, an impossible scene had played out. I spent that night at Mara's, and though she tried to get me to explain, I found I couldn't articulate it. How do you tell someone that either you're going crazy or your house is? I showed her the camera footage the next morning. We sat at her kitchen table, my laptop between us, reviewing the recordings from Friday night. The hallway cam showed me going upstairs at 11:15 p.m. A little later, faint crashing sounds, the mirror, I presumed, came from downstairs, but the camera didn't capture the foyer. What it did capture was far more horrifying. At 11:47 p.m., my closed bedroom door slowly swung open on its own. A tall, dark humanoid figure stepped out into the hallway. The image was grainy but unmistakable, a lanky silhouette at least 7